Genesis, the first book of the Bible, relates some of the most iconic stories ever told. Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, Noah and the Great Flood, and Joseph and his coat of many colors. But one character dominates more pages than any other: Abraham. Abraham's life is the first detailed biography in the Bible. We're told where he was born, where he traveled, and the tests God put him through. And the Bible tells us where Abraham and his family were buried, here in Hebron, in Israel's disputed West Bank. These Jewish pilgrims have come here to pay homage to the Old Testament prophet Abraham, whom they believe is buried in a tomb just behind me. For Jews, Abraham is the father of their nation. But amazingly, Christians and Muslims also revere Abraham as their patriarch, and they say that they are also descended from him. World statesmen frequently invoke the name of Abraham as a unifying figure for all three faiths.
Many Jews, Muslims and Christians are entirely ignorant of the rich Abrahamic heritage we share in common.
And the United States will work for all the children of Abraham.
And all the children of Abraham will live side by side in peace.
You'd think that this common claim of ancestry would be enough to unite these three faiths. You'd be wrong.
The land of Israel was promised to the children of Abraham.
The Jewish people only. Only the Jewish people.
From my perspective, Abraham is for the Jews and the Christians.
سيدنا إبراهيم مسلم حنيفا مسلم لا يهودي ولا مسيح مسلم.
2 billion Christians, 1.5 billion Muslims, and 12 million Jews claim Abraham as the father of their faith. I want to find out who is Abraham and what are the differences in the Abrahams of the Christian and Jewish Bible and the Abraham of the Qur'an. Is Abraham's legacy one of the greatest sources of division in the world today, or does the great patriarch hold the key to peace and reconciliation? I was brought up as a Muslim, and as a child I was taught that Abraham was a great prophet in the Qur'an. But I was also educated at Christian schools in Britain, where I picked up a basic understanding of the Bible's account of Abraham. I learned that at a time when everyone else was worshipping many gods, Abraham agreed to worship only the one God. I was taught that in return, God promised Abraham and through him the Jewish people land, modern-day Israel. And the part of the story I'll never forget is when God tested Abraham by ordering him to kill his son Isaac. I need to know more about Abraham, so I'm meeting Hebrew Bible expert Dr. Francesca Stavrakopoulou.
According to the story in the Old Testament, God says to Abraham, I want to choose you, I'm going to choose you of all people in the world to be exclusively my worshipper. And so it's a question about a very intimate relationship between God and one person. So if you like, God almost becomes his patron deity, his personal God.
So what significance does Abraham have for the Jews?
The promise of land is the big hook for this biblical story. And the deal that God and Abraham strike, God says, if you worship me and only me exclusively, I will give you your own land. And this is a land of imperial proportions. This is a vast land. And I'll also give you numerous descendants so many that they'll equal the number of stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. And in return, Abraham has to worship him exclusively. And he has to circumcise himself and all the male members in his house as a sign of this obedience, this exclusive worship, this very intimate relationship between God and Abraham.
Of all the unlikely places, Abraham's story begins here in Iraq. I'm near the place where, according to biblical tradition, Abraham was born some 4,000 years ago. This is the US Talil military base in southern Iraq. Today, it's home to 8,000 American soldiers who are here to reconstruct the country in what the American military calls Operation Enduring Freedom. The last time I was here, reporting on the Iraq War, there was bitter fighting going on between insurgents and US soldiers. I've returned this time because this military base is said to be close to the place where Abraham was born. Now, the Bible says in Genesis that Abraham was born in Ur of Chaldees, and in Jewish and Christian tradition, Ur of Chaldees is located in modern-day Iraq. In fact, to a specific location just the other side of the perimeter fence to this military base. We've been held up here for about 15 minutes, and the reason is that there's been indirect fire. Some mortar rounds have been fired into the base, and it may mean that we can't get to the other side of the perimeter fence to see the place where people believe Abraham was born. After 30 minutes, we get the all clear and continue our journey to the archaeological sites beyond the camp. The ruins of the city of Ur are dominated by a ziggurat or temple. It was a sacred site for the Sumerian people, the world's oldest known civilization. I've been joined here by Mr. Abdul Amir Amdani of the Iraqi State Board for Antiquities and Heritage.
Here we are on the Sumerian city of Ur. And in that period, Ur was the capital of Sumerian kingdom.
This was a significant civilization that spanned a large area and that did have real wealth.
Right. If we talk about the Sumerian civilization, they have like cities, a legal system, arts, literature, and Abraham and his family, it should be a part of this system.
What is the importance of this place here that we're standing on?
I mean, here is the temple of Nannar, the moon god. Sumerian worship a lot of gods, exactly 5,000 gods. Here is the ziggurat, and here's the holy area, which is including the temples, the royal palace, the cemetery, the royal cemetery, and there, on the east part of the city, there's the houses of population. One of those houses, it could be belong to Abraham family.
So Abram, his name before God changed it to Abraham, was a sheikh from the Iron Age period, a time when people followed and worshipped many different gods and idols. Mr. Amdani pointed out that there is no archaeological evidence to prove that Abraham lived in Ur. But according to the Bible, Genesis chapter 12, when Abraham was 75, God told him, "Leave your country, your relatives, and your father's home, and go to a land I am going to show you." God tells Abraham, "Follow me," and he obeys. And for the next 100 years, Abraham wanders the region we now know as the Middle East. And many people believe he follows the route in red on the map behind me, starting in Ur in southern Iraq. He travels up to what is southern Turkey today in Haran, and then he travels south to Canaan, which is Israel and the Palestinian territories. From now on, all the key events in Abraham's life take place in this region. This powerful moment when Abraham answered a call from God to give up everything and to follow him is central to the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim faiths.
Standing on the promises of God, standing.
This evening at the US Army base, Chaplain Ron McKay leads a Bible study class on Abraham.
Standing, I'm standing on the promises.
He explains the story from his own particular Christian perspective.
When it comes to the birth of nations, there's no greater founding father than Father Abraham. To understand Abraham is to understand the entire Scripture. And of course, there are different viewpoints and interpretations, and it truly is the continental divide of all of theology. And that is one of the reasons our world is so chaotic this very day.
Chaplain, why is what is happening in Iraq, why you find yourself here in Iraq, relevant to the story of Abraham?
Everybody wants a piece of Abraham. Everybody wants to take those promises and apply it to themselves. The Jews want it. The Christians want it. The Arab people want it.
Do you feel that Abraham can be shared between all the three main faiths?
From my perspective as a Christian, I believe that Abraham is first of all the Jewish father through Isaac, the son of promise. And I believe that through an extension, Jesus Christ was who the seed really was talking about. I view the Islamic scriptures and their interpretation as a little too late into the scene. And so, yes, from my perspective, Abraham is for the Jews and the Christians.
And there was I thinking, we all share a rich Abrahamic heritage, to quote Tony Blair. But in the version of divine history I just heard, 1.5 billion Muslims are being denied their claim to Abraham.
This is a quiet but still eerily uneasy place. And for many Muslims, Iraq remains a Muslim country that is occupied by a largely Christian Western army. And they point as evidence to the fact that right here you have an American base slap bang next door to the supposed birthplace of Abraham, the father of three monotheistic faiths. And already at the beginning of my journey to tell Abraham's story, I can see that his legacy is a complex one and one defined by conflict.
I'm on a quest to find the Abraham of the Jewish and Christian Bibles and the Muslim Holy Qur'an. I've travelled to Iraq, once part of ancient Mesopotamia, to visit the place where, according to biblical tradition, Abraham was born. Now, I want to know how the account of Abraham in the Bible came to be written. According to the scriptures, the Israelites lived on and off in Canaan, the land which God had promised Abraham for several generations. Then disaster struck. They were conquered and forced into exile to Babylon in Mesopotamia.
The story of Abraham in the Bible was written at a time of great trouble and difficulty, in the sense that it was written in the 6th century BCE. This was the time when the Israelites were expelled from the land by the Babylonians. This is the time of the Great Exile. So the Israelite nation have lost everything. They've lost their own political independence, they've lost their land, they've lost the temple in which they worshipped God, they've lost everything. For them, writing about who they are, where they've come from, is a really important ideological task. It's helping them to recreate and to cement their own identity. Who are we? We haven't got the land anymore. We haven't got the temple. We haven't got the Davidic king, but we've got Abraham. He's our ancestor. And so they're basically imitating Abraham. Abraham came from Mesopotamia and came into the land. Well, we're now in Mesopotamia. We've been exiled to Babylon, but we can regain that land that was promised to Abraham. So obviously that has certain repercussions today, in the sense that people believe that this land is still promised to the people who claim descent from Abraham.
The minute I set foot in Israel, I'm caught up in the repercussions of Abraham's promise of land. Land the Palestinians have occupied for centuries and which the Jews believe belongs to them. The battle I'm witnessing is between Jews and Muslims over access to one of the holiest sites to all the faiths, the Temple Mount, or as the Muslims call it, Haram al-Sharif.
They said there'd be tension, and there was. Palestinian boys started throwing rocks, and now there's a huge security operation clearing the areas around the compound.
While the security forces break up the crowds around Temple Mount, I'm heading to the Western Wall, one of the holiest places for Jews. A group of Jewish boys are celebrating their bar mitzvah, the time when they come of age. They will have learnt from birth the story of Abraham and God's promise of land to the Jewish people.
We Jews view ourselves as spiritual inheritors of Abraham and even physical inheritors of Abraham. When I say spiritually, we're descendants of Abraham, who is the man who signed on the dotted line with God. He's the individual who made the covenant with God about 3,800 years ago. And we see throughout the Bible, God is constantly reaffirming that relationship. Whenever he speaks to the Jewish people in successive generations, he always goes back to the original signer on the agreement. The Jewish people are a unique nation that's supposed to actualize this mission of being a light to nations in one specific piece of real estate. And the land of Israel has a unique holiness and ability to it that enables the Jewish people. It's our power supply. The way I explain it is we're a unique appliance, and the only outlet that we can plug into that really fits is the land of Israel.
I can feel this passion amongst Jews that for them, land and faith are inextricably linked. And it is through Abraham that knot is tied. But where do other faiths fit into the picture? Archbishop Aristarchos is a patriarch of the Greek Orthodox Church in Jerusalem.
We believe what is written in the Old Testament about Abraham. In Genesis, patriarch Abraham is for Jews and for us Christians, one of the great patriarchs.
What do Christians believe about the covenants that God made with Abraham?
We, as Orthodox, believe that God made the covenant with Abraham for the Jewish nation, but then as well we believe that through Jesus Christ, who is a descendant of Abraham, made a covenant with us. Through Jesus Christ, we are called to God according to the New Testament. We have the Old Covenant and the New Covenant.
So what you're saying is the covenant with Jesus Christ is the fulfillment of the covenant with Abraham.
Yes, we believe so. This is our Christian belief.
And significantly, writers in the New Testament were at pains to establish a family tree for Jesus which stretched all the way back to Abraham. The last of the great monotheistic faiths, Islam, came on the scene much later in the 7th century. And as I learnt when I was a boy growing up in London, for Muslims, Abraham is also the great patriarch of their faith.
And it's interesting there that...
I'm meeting with Dr. Mustafa Abu Sway, Associate Professor of Philosophy and Islamic Studies at Al-Quds University in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Submission to God, he pointed out, is not only the essence of the Abraham story, it's actually the definition of what it means to be a Muslim.
Dr. Abu Sway, can you tell me first of all, how do Muslims see themselves as being connected to Abraham?
Abraham is mentioned in the Quran as the first Muslim. He called basically for pure monotheism, the first one to submit to the will of God, and this is why Muslims basically mentions him every day in their prayers.
And in terms of the importance, the centrality of Abraham in the Quran,
Islam perceives itself as the last phase of revelation. And on that line of prophets, we have Abraham and we have the family of Imran. In the Quran, most of the 25 names of prophets come from the lineage of Abraham.
do Muslims believe that they have a promise from God through Abraham of land in the way that there is this covenant, this promise in Judaism?
There is no covenant with Abraham that is related to the land. Ultimately, It is the idea of being a monotheist, submitting oneself to the will of God, and that's where the story of Abraham, is very, very important in the Quran.
All three faiths revere Abraham, but they all have different interpretations of his story.
For Jews, the critical thing is the covenant that God makes with Abraham over land. Christians argue that that covenant is superseded by the one God makes with his own son, Jesus. And for Muslims, Abraham is the highest example of obedience to God.
But what all three religions share is their admiration for Abraham's willingness to risk it all for God. And for God, Abraham was willing to travel thousands of miles, and everywhere he went, he built altars to worship him. But as well as land, God had promised Abraham many descendants. He said, "I will make your offspring as numerous as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore." Yet now in his 80s, Abraham had no children. So I want to find out how God fulfilled this side of the bargain to make Abraham the head of a huge family. In the desert, he traveled with his wife, Sarah, who was in her 70s, and her servant Hagar, together with their growing household.
We're told from the very beginning of the story that Sarah, his wife, is infertile, she's barren. So the whole time that we're tracing Abraham's story in the biblical tradition, we're thinking, well, where are the kids? How's he going to fulfill this divine promise of a huge number of generations? Sarah decides to give Hagar, her slave girl, to Abraham. And so with Hagar, Abraham has his firstborn child, Ishmael. But then some years later, God performs this incredible miracle. He is the God who can open the womb. And Sarah conceives, and she has a son, Isaac. And so you have two women, two mothers, and two sons.
I'm on my way to Beersheba, 50 miles south of Jerusalem, where Abraham was directed by God to live, and where it's believed some of the most dramatic and disturbing episodes in the life of Abraham's family were played out. Avner Goren is an archaeologist whose recent work has focused on the study of sites key to Abraham.
Sarah was quite an old lady and she didn't have yet a child, and therefore she decided to offer Abraham her maid Hagar, and Hagar got pregnant, gave birth, but even before giving birth she started to ignore Sarah and not treated her well.
Because she was pregnant and Sarah was still barren, yeah.
Yeah, and after giving a birth to Ishmael, 13 years later, Isaac was born. Sarah wanted to get rid of both of them. She forced Abraham to send Hagar and Ishmael away, and they went here to the desert.
From Beersheba, Abraham banished his son Ishmael and his mother Hagar out into this desert, where he must have known they were likely to die. But God intervened to save Ishmael and sent an angel to tell Hagar, "Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad, and hold him with your hand, for I will make him a great nation." Mother and son survived. Some interpretations of the Bible claim that Ishmael went on to become the father of the Arab people. According to Islamic history, Abraham leaves Hagar and Ishmael in the desert in Mecca. Later on in this account, Abraham and Ishmael are reunited and together build the foundations of the Kaaba, Islam's holiest shrine. But according to the Bible, Ishmael never sees his father again, and Abraham's troubling relationship with his children gets worse.
What happens next here in Beersheba is, for me, the most horrific part of the story of Abraham and the part that is most difficult to understand. God demands of Abraham to show his utter devotion to him by carrying out the most terrible sacrifice of all.
According to biblical tradition, God instructs Abraham to leave this place and go to a mountain in order to kill his beloved son. I've traced Abraham's journey through the desert as he followed God's orders. And I've looked at his desperate attempts to produce a son and heir in Isaac, as well as the banishment of his first son, Ishmael.
But now I'm back in Jerusalem in order to explore the defining moment in Abraham's relationship with God, the two women in his life, and his two sons.
The Jewish and Christian Bibles describe how Abraham was willing to submit to God and sacrifice his son. For Jews, the Akedah, or binding of Isaac, is a sublime moment.
Abraham takes Isaac, they take the wood, they hike up to the top of the hill. There's an altar there, he ties him up, he's about to do it, and then an angel appears and says, don't send out your hand against the child. Now I know you got what it takes, basically. But it's really God pushing Abraham to the absolute limit to see if he's able to go all the way, if his dedication to relationship with God and truth supersedes everything, even his love for his son. And we say that is the power that was embedded in Abraham's soul, and that'll be carried on to the Jewish people throughout generation after generation. This took place actually underneath the Gold Dome, which, contrary to what other people think, the Western Wall is not the holiest spot in the world for the Jewish people. The highest part of that hill is underneath the Gold Dome.
In this divided land, the Gold Dome, or Dome of the Rock, is under Israeli control but managed by the Muslim authorities. In fact, it's been a Muslim shrine for 1,300 years and is the oldest existing Islamic building in the world. For Muslims, it's holy because this is where they believe that the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven. But they don't believe Abraham tried to sacrifice his son here, and crucially, unlike the Jews, they believe it was Abraham's first son, Ishmael, not Isaac, who was the intended offering to God.
What does the Quran say about this moment in which Abraham was tested to sacrifice his son and its importance?
Abraham was put to the test. Abraham was asked to sacrifice his son, and we know that it is Ishmael. He succeeded in absolutely submitting himself to the will of God. There was not even a speck of doubt. I mean, he survived the test because he knew it was from God. It's a beautiful moment. It's the way we read the Quran.
For Muslims, Abraham's son Ishmael is the forefather of the Prophet Muhammad. Jews, on the other hand, claim descent from Abraham's son, Isaac. But what both faiths share is an admiration for Abraham's willingness to show his total devotion to God by being prepared to kill his own son. In a few hours' time, one of Judaism's holiest days, Yom Kippur, will begin. This event is marked with a sacrifice intended to cleanse the believer's sins. It seems that everywhere I go in Jerusalem, I am confronted by the themes of blood and sacrifice that are central to the Abraham story. What I really need right now is a contemporary take on the Abraham story. So I'm meeting one of Israel's leading human rights activists, Anat Hoffman. She's also a self-taught reader of the Hebrew Torah.
ויאמר אליו אברהם, ויאמר הנני, and he said Abraham, and he said, here I am. ויאמר קח נא את בנך, את יחידך אשר אהבת, את יצחק, ולך לך אל ארץ המוריה, ועלהו שם לעולם. Take your son, your only one, the one you loved, take Isaac, and go to the Moriah mountain and sacrifice him for me. Well, first, let's start with the fact that it's a very dysfunctional family. Extremely dysfunctional. Dysfunctional towards boys, dysfunctional towards women, dysfunctional all around. He tries to kill both his children, both the son of Hagar, Ishmael, and the son is Sarah's son, Yitzchak. What kind of a father is it? So, and then forever we are locked, the sons of Ishmael, the sons of Yitzchak. Who did he love more? It's sibling rivalry of the worst kind. Who did he promise this land for? So the conflict that we're all hearing about in the news is an old sibling rivalry stemming from here.
Do you think that heritage of the sacrifice, if you like, is still very much alive?
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm afraid that the fundamental religion encourages total commitment, and the extreme total commitment is to kill yourself to God. And unfortunately, this is still the discourse here.
So where does this lethal concoction of sibling rivalry and the worship of sacrifice lead?
Well, I'll tell you where it leads to. It leads to one of the bitterest and most intractable conflicts in the Middle East, the question of the ownership of land. And nothing could summarize that more than this stark, huge war aimed at separating the children of Abraham.
In the Bible, Abraham lives to 175, but he is mortal, and his story does have an ending. I'm heading to Hebron, south of Jerusalem, where both the Qur'an and the Bible agree Abraham died and is buried. Hebron in Hebrew is Chevron, and in Arabic, Al-Khalil. And interestingly, both words translate as dear friend. But this town is not a place of friendship. Abraham's final resting place, in fact, is the front line in the battle between Palestinians who've lived here for centuries and Jewish settlers who think that through Abraham, God promised this land to them and them alone. It's here in Hebron that Abraham's two sons, separated when they were children, meet for the last time in order to bury their father. Ishmael, according to some, became father of the Arab people, and Isaac, father of the Jews. Today marks the time in the Jewish calendar when pilgrims from all over Israel come to Abraham's tomb to honor him. But divisions in here mirror divisions outside. This place of worship is literally split between two faiths. There is the Muslim side and here the Jewish one, and neither can enter the other's holy place. A day of celebration can't disguise the apartheid that plagues this town. Even the streets are divided. Concrete blocks separate Jews on the left from Muslims on the right. The center of the town is home to 170,000 Palestinians.
High above Hebron are two Israeli settlements. Inside them live 800 Jewish settlers. And above me, you can see the rocks and the rubbish that the settlers throw down on the Palestinians. Nothing symbolizes the breakdown in relations between Abraham's families more than this tense and divided town. The Jewish settlers say that this land belongs to them because God gave it to them. What do you think?
لا هذه الأرض ما هي إلهم. هذه أرض إسلامية أبا عن جد. أرض إسلام هذه وكلها مجبولة في دم الشهداء كلها. بعدين سيدنا إبراهيم مسلم حنيفا مسلم. لا يهودي ولا مسيح مسلم.
Why is Ibrahim important today to you as a Muslim?
كل وقت مهم إنه ما فيش من زمان ولا اليوم كل على مر الأزمنة على مر الأزمنة ومر العصور سيدنا إبراهيم مهم إنه.
Jews, Muslims and Christians all call Abraham their father. But so far, I've failed to find evidence of how his story unites them. I'm feeling discouraged. Surely in Israel there must be some members from the families of Abraham who are campaigning for peace instead of suing for war. Everywhere I've been in Israel, I've seen dissent and division. But in the Bible, God promises Abraham in Genesis, "I will make you a great nation, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." I want to meet with those who are working for an end to the conflict, for a time when God's blessing can be conferred on all the families of Abraham. The Hand-in-Hand School in Jerusalem is a very special place where Jewish and Muslim kids share classes from primary right through to secondary school. I've joined a class conducted in both Hebrew and Arabic where the kids are getting a lesson on Abraham. For me, it's an opportunity to put some questions about Abraham to the next generation.
Do you think his story is useful for finding reconciliation and peace between Muslims and Jews?
I think it is, because it would help both groups to be together more and talk to each other.
אני חושבת שזה לא יעזור, בגלל שכבר ניסו הרבה דרכים אבל לא הצליחו. אולי אחר כך בעתיד יצליחו, אני לא יודעת.
I think yes, it will help us every day, because it teaches us that we should help each other every day. If somebody gets in trouble, we should help him.
אני דווקא חושבת שזה לא יעזור, שאם רוצים שיש שלום, יש דרכים אחרות. כי זה היה מזמן, זה כבר היה, זה לא יודעת, אני לא מצליחה לקשר את זה כל כך.
It was great to see Jewish and Muslim kids not just in the same room, but actually studying together. And while they might not all agree about Abraham, at least they feel free to talk about it. I've come back to Hebron once more, this time to meet Mikhail Mankin, a member of one of Israel's most unusual organizations. The group, Breaking the Silence, are Israeli soldiers who've openly criticized what they say is the military strategy of excessive force against Palestinians. Mikhail is working alongside Palestinian community activist Isa Amro, who belongs to a peace group here in Hebron known as Sons of Abraham.
So this is the house where you've been working together on, right?
Their current project is to turn this Palestinian-owned house into a community center. But Israeli settlers have illegally moved into the house on the hill above and are now trying to occupy this one as well.
We noticed that the settlers are trying to take over this house. It's a Palestinian house. It's a private property.
Where were they?
They were living in this house.
And they still are. This house is owned by settlers. It's also a Palestinian house.
Right.
But owned by settlers right now as well.
And it was that community or those Israelis who wanted to move into this house?
Yeah.
So they kept attacking us here, throwing stones. They broke into the house many times. They burned the kitchen.
And what do you both get out of it? I mean, beyond keeping this land, is there something deeper in terms of working together?
Something very important. He's one of the sons of Abraham, and I'm one of the sons of Abraham. I feel that Abraham is my grandfather, one of my grandfather. It's the same for him. So it's one of the common, let's say, background which we can start from.
Company a second.
Okay.
But ask away.
Okay.
Okay. Now he has to stop filming.
We will keep filming. We are allowed, by the Israeli law, we are allowed to film soldiers, settlers in our... The law supports me, I am working according to the Israeli law. I know the law well. You want me to call the police to come to talk to you about it?
Some soldiers.
He has to turn around.
Turn the camera on.
The soldiers made us stop filming and Isa had to leave for Jerusalem. But later, I was able to talk with Mikhail about the contradictions between his belief as a Jew in the Abrahamic covenants of land and his work with Palestinians in Hebron trying to keep their land.
You're religious, you're observant, you've been a soldier, you're a father, but you feel troubled by this whole story of Abraham.
Well, yeah, I mean, of course, yeah. It's true that, you know, God promised Abraham all of this land. But God also told Abraham and his sons and followers a lot of other things. And there's a conflict, and there's a contradiction. So in a, I don't even know to say an ideal world, but in an alternative world, that promise might play. But the fact of the matter is to go with that promise, for us to pursue that promise means that we have to steal. It means that we have to, you know, we have to abuse. It means that we have to do a lot of bad things to people who live here.
Do you think we should just forget about Abraham, leave him to one side with all of the legacies and just say he was the father of monotheism and let's leave it at that?
Well, I can't. I mean, maybe we should, but it's my history. You know, it's my tradition. It's not something that, you know, I don't think it's a natural thing to forget where you came from.
Michal and Isa are the exception rather than the rule here in the West Bank. But although they are fighting against the odds, these two sons of Abraham have found a way to work together. To me, they embody the spirit of God's promise to make Abraham the father of all nations. I had one final visit to make, perhaps the most difficult one of all. I'm on my way to meet two very exceptional people. Jewish mother Robbie Damelin lost her son David, who was killed by a Palestinian sniper. Palestinian Ali Abu Awad lost his brother Yusuf, who was killed by Israeli soldiers, and Ali himself spent 3 years in prison. Both Robbie and Ali were tempted but ultimately refused to seek revenge for their loss, and today are close friends. Together, as members of the Parent Circle Families Forum, they speak to audiences around the world about the need for reconciliation.
Keep Abraham, keep God rest from us, you know, because even God is tired about this conflict. You know, what is more important for God? Al-Aqsa Mosque or people's life? What is more important for Jewish? Is the Kotel or a Jewish life?
You can believe in whatever you like, because if that's what gives you solace, that's what you must do. But you cannot take that and push it onto the public in order for them to believe that they own a piece of land, which I've never seen any proof of them owning, and I haven't seen any title deeds. So take that Abrahamic faith, and if it creates a good way of living for people, that's fine, but it has nothing to do with state or land, and I believe that the conflict here is nothing to do with religion. I think it's to do with land.
Ali, what would you say if you had across from you now a Palestinian mother who, because of everything she's been through, said, I'm prepared to sacrifice myself, you know, my children for Palestine, for Al-Aqsa, for the land, or a young Palestinian man who felt the same way? What would you say to them?
I was born to live. God put me to this life to live, not to be a victim of somebody and not to be a killer of somebody. This conflict will end in one way: justice, freedom for Palestinians, security for Israelis, and that's it. We don't have to belong to any religion, and we don't have to have an ideology, religious agreement to remove a settlement or a checkpoint.
Tell me about how you both feel about this legacy of sacrifice from the Abrahamic story in terms of the conflict and what is happening today and the sacrifices that people are making. How do you both feel about that?
In a very sad and terrible way. I think that in a way I sacrificed my child to this country. You know, that's the most terrible thing to think. I can't believe that I actually was part of the system to allow that to happen. And so I can't find any justification or any religion that says kill your children. You know what? I think I might actually give up my own life if I could bring David back. That I would consider a sacrifice that is moral. I have no right to sacrifice somebody else's life in my name.
I have now seen some remarkable instances of Abraham's children working together in peace. This gives me real hope. But my overwhelming feeling is that this cooperation is in spite of the Abraham legacy rather than a consequence of it.
The United States will work for all the children of Abraham.
The rich Abrahamic heritage we share in common.
All the children of Abraham will live in peace.
The politicians' cozy vision of a family of three united faiths now seems hopelessly naive. From the point where Abraham banished his son Ishmael and favored Isaac, he set up a deadly rivalry between the two branches of his family, which has plagued them down the centuries.
But I don't lay all the blame on Abraham. I think we must share the blame, particularly in continuing to make some of his worst mistakes, such as the willingness to sacrifice our children. I think what we have to remember is what God told Abraham in the Bible, that he would be the father of many nations. And if that is to mean anything, it has to mean all nations. And until that notion is fully embraced, then we, the children of Abraham, seem doomed to continue this fatal feud.
In the next programme, Anne Widdecombe goes in search of the laws God gave Moses, traces them through history, and asks if we would be a better society if we followed them today.
The Ten Commandments have underpinned Western law for centuries, indeed for millennia.
These damn commandments of yours, you say they've made life better, I say they've suppressed and tyrannized and bullied.